my name is Silentage. Welcome back to my studio in the first episode of a new series where I'm gonna break down my samples, showing you exactly what's happening behind the scenes, giving you insight into my production process, recording techniques, music theory, mixing, and all that good stuff. So today I'm gonna go over the sample titled Dark Red Lullaby that I made in last week's episode of sample making. So without further ado, let's get into it. I usually start my samples by playing around on keys or on my acoustic guitar and basically just brain dumping all of my recent ideas and trying to see what sticks out, what works and what doesn't. And then when I settle down on a particular idea, I try to write a complete section like an 8-bar loop that I can then record and listen to a few times. This gives me a rough sketch of the sample, lets me figure out the tempo and pick the key. So this time I decided to try out a few ideas on my electric guitar, and after some trial and error I came up with this melody. I then overdubbed a sort of variation, a counter melody if you will, and run everything through this amazing new reverb by Sound Toys. Then it was just a matter of cutting some unnecessary frequencies and some SSQ for a bit of additional flavor. The melody was already implying some chord tones, so I basically decided to lean into them and came up with this progression. To add some movement and rhythm, I played it in quarter notes, in this sort of staccato style. Here's how it sounds like. I'm a big fan of adding little accents and passing notes to my progressions, so I made a new track and improvised some of those over the chords. In both cases, I used Ravel Grand by UAD, which is like my favorite piano plugin right now. I treated those two tracks with some Fairchild compressor and a Pultec EQ to tame that low-mid build-up. I felt like this higher piano part was still lacking some sustain and sparkle, so I decided to basically double it with an electric piano. So overall, the vibe of the sample was already there, and everything started to slowly come together. Now it was just a matter of filling the gaps and adding some complementary elements without overcrowding the whole thing. So I started with taking care of the pause between two guitar sections. I went with a different sounding electric piano, this time around playing it in a lower register. I think that those two sounds work quite well when paired together. Two things that the sample was still surely lacking were some drums and some bass. I wanted to keep them very simple and as much natural and organic as I could, but since I don't have access to a real drum kit nor to a bass guitar, I settled on those two plugins and came up with this groove. I split the bass signal into two separate tracks, one for low end and some weight, and one for articulation and better translation to smaller speakers. I then applied a sort of opposite processing to each of those tracks, focusing on warm low end and mono compatibility on the first one, and upper harmonics and some bite on the second one. And now it was just a matter of gluing everything together, and in order to do that I applied this processing. Pultec EQ with those classic low-end enhancement settings, the SSQ for attenuation of any muddiness around 200 Hz, and a waves maximizer on this cozy and warm profile to catch any excessive peaks and make the drums and bass more consistent. At that point, I felt like the sample was still missing a little bit of texture or some ear candy. So I started with those harp plucks from BBC Symphony Orchestra plugin that I just soaked with Space Blender reverb and rendered them out. Then I moved to the string section. I wanted to keep it fairly simple to avoid overcomplicating the arrangement. I landed on a viola and a cello, also from Spitfire's BBC plugin. Here's how they sound like together. In terms of processing, I used VEQ4, which is like my secret sauce for brightening the strings and giving them more air without any unpleasant harshness. And then I just put a Fairchild comp on a slow strings preset for some light glue. So for me, the sample was now calling for some vocals. I first tried adding a choir, but it kept on sounding too big, too lush and open, if you will. But then I came across this short little poem that I wrote the other day and adjusted it a little bit to make it work with the melody, and decided to sing it in this subdued, raspy, breathy voice. I'm a big fan of stacking the vocals in this sort of Elliott Smith-inspired way that makes them sound spacious yet very intimate at the same time. I just felt like it would fit the atmosphere of the sample quite well. So I did 4 takes, each time singing them just a little bit differently. I put the most precise one in the middle and panned the other 2 slightly to the left and slightly to the right. The 4th take was doubling only some of the lines, and I left it in the middle of the stereo field, but lowering the volume quite a bit. Here's how they sound like together. All through, I'm afraid, 'cause every time we say goodbye, there's this thing that dies inside. I fractured my own mind. I prefer a simplistic approach to vocal chains, so there's nothing too crazy in there. Ableton Stock EQ taking care of some unwanted frequencies, Manley Tube preamp for some gain and tone, LA2A my absolute favorite vocal compressor, Waves de-esser reducing harshness and sibilance, some fresh air for top end sparkle, and a bit of RVox for dynamic range control. The processing stays pretty much the same across all 4 takes, with an exception of this one free plugin called SweetVox by Analog Obsession that I put only on this main take. The rest of the effects come from 2 return tracks, one with lexicon reverb on my go-to preset called Ballad Vocals, that I then sidechain to the main Vox track in order to retain the clarity and avoid washing out and blurring the actual words. On the second return track I put a Galaxy Tape Echo, serving as a slapback delay. So at that point the sample was pretty much done. Now it was just a matter of adding a tape emulation on the mix bus and just slightly limiting the whole thing. So the sample and the stems are already up on my Patreon. You can find them in last week's post, but I also uploaded MIDI files for each track, so you can grab them and experiment in your own projects. You can support my work by joining my Patreon or by liking or subscribing here on YouTube. I would really appreciate that. But for now, thank you for your time watching this, and see you next week. Peace.